Now, as always, I have not met this person in person. They are one of my subscribers. They've emailed me their palms. I don't know anything about them other than what they've emailed me. This is a lady, she's 53, and she's nervous about what I might find out. You can see the palm prints are nice and clear. This is great. The more clarity I have, the more clarity I can provide. And one of the first things I notice about this person's palms are the horizontal lines on Mercury and on the thumb. There's almost a sort of band here restricting, an obstacle almost. I'm going to get to the bottom of what I think these little mysteries are. I love a mystery. But first of all, I'm going to talk about the chirognomy, and that is the hand shape of the fingers and the palms themselves. And this is just to determine the character template of a person, so we can really filter through the palmar information through that template. This is not a straightforward hand shape, so this is not a straightforward person. If a person can't be put into a box, then they likely feel that they don't actually fit in themselves in some ways in society. Now, there are some watery elements. The palms themselves are just about rectangular. The fingers are long. A square palm and long fingers would say an air hand. However, there are some fiery and sort of watery elements as well. So this is a very sort of mixed person, a very mixed hand. You know, it's sort of, when we're looking at this kind of seven, you know, the Darpantigny seven hand shapes, the conic, the psychic, the primary, the elemental, the psychic, the philosophic. It's none of those, and so it kind of falls into that seventh mixed category. There's a certain sort of robustness to this person's palms, so they don't quite fit into that typical sort of slim, neat, tapering kind of wafy, psychic-looking hands. Although, so there's a lot of mixture here with this person. A lot of very sort of complex person, in that they probably feel themselves as a bit of a misfit. And one of the fundamental foundations for hand analysis is the sort of formula in which we go about assessing a person's hands. Before we really get into what we see in the palms themselves, is the palm shape and the texture, the colour, the size, the deficiency of the mounts and things. And this is something I've neglected actually a little bit recently. So I'm going to pull back to this and work through David Brandon Jones's formula. And so actually I can see here that the mount of Venus here is a little bit deficient. I mean, you can see on the left hand there's a little bit of redness going on. I mean, I'm not going to look too much into that, but there is a tiny bit of it here going on. So that would suggest that this area is quite active. The palms themselves look quite sort of springy and firm. Looks like there's a liveliness to their character, if anything. The two middle fingers are leaning in. They're quite close towards each other as well. That would suggest a team player. I think this person is probably quite sociable, has quite a lot of friends. I think they do quite a lot of self-expression on their own, and they appreciate that alone time. But I do think they are also quite sociable. There's two sides to this person. As I say, this is quite a complex person, bit of an oddball in some ways. So overall, the palm itself is conic. You know, there's some roundedness here. The fingers are rounded and conic, but there's some square overtones as well. So there's this sensitivity, intuition, but there's also a very sort of practical and pragmatic nature. This is certainly a creative individual with this long leaning headline into Luna. So the Mercury fingers, they're low set and they don't quite reach the second phalanx they don't quite reach past the second phalanx of Apollo. But when we offset the length of Mercury against the bottom two phalanges of Apollo, it's quite clearly longer. So what we actually have here is a long Mercury finger. It's low set, which might mean this person has difficulty communicating with those closest to them. They may well have had some difficulties during childhood in terms of having that loving bond, that kind of love we need to help express ourselves, help grow that area of self-expression. However, being a long Mercury finger, being that they are creative, being that they prefer to express themselves in isolation, being that they are quite sociable, and also being that we have this little mystery right here, I think we're falling into that we're finding some clues here as to what this means and why we have this. So it is said that the appearance of an extra phalanx on Mercury, which is the most common place to see it, and only about 1% of people have this, it's meant to, there's a couple of beliefs around this, a couple of theories. One of them is that it's meant to create an extra capacity for communication, and this is always seen on the hands of people who work in, well, I've read this anyway, I'm not necessarily sure this is true, that it's always seen in the hands of people who work in telecommunications. You know, people who work in call centers, who work in radio. And just looking at the sort of inherent length of the tip of Mercury, it's quite long, especially if we were to interpret this as being the overall length of the first phalanx of Mercury. If we were to say that this was the, you know, the cutoff point there, and that this was in fact, you know, some sort of obstacle. But this is not how I'm reading this. Another theory would be that this is some sort of obstacle, some sort of blockage, some sort of damage perhaps to the area of the body that this part of the palm represents. Now, I have read the palms of a man who had this same line all across his fingers. In fact, it was strongest at the little finger and worked its way in, and he had it on both left and right hands. And eventually I came to the conclusion that this was you know, the second phalanges of all of the fingers represent the head as a whole, physically, as well as, you know, our decisions and executive, managerial kind of abilities. But being that there was such a clear physical obstruction across all of them on both hands, I felt this was physical. And sometimes you need to ask a few questions to find out a few answers, especially when the mystery is quite complex. And I'll put the description, I'll put the link in for that video. And it actually turned out that these lines all the way across, this kind of damage across this area of the body, and it could be nose, eyes, throat, you know, this entire region of the body. And I said, is this due to a head injury you had when you were young? Because the lines were just so definite. And he said no. And as I was talking to him, I could see he had a dimple, a scar on his temple. And I was just about to ask him, and he said, well, when I was a baby, I was 11 pounds, and I was, you know, they had to use forceps on me, on my head, pull me out, and that's left a scar here. And so that was the reasoning for this. This, I believe, it's one of two things. It is, in fact, this extra kind of capacity for communicative abilities, this extra ability to communicate, to express their message in some form. They've developed this. That's one theory. The other theory is that this is represents the parathyroid. I just had to check. I have got that right. It's the parathyroid. There doesn't seem to be any imbalance with the thyroid itself, but there could be some damage to the parathyroid. So I'm caught between two theories there. The other mystery is this sort of band around this person's ideas and logic, and it looks quite sort of restrictive. It looks like an obstacle. I mean, you can see a second one here, and it gives this appearance of an actual ring itself. It looks obstructing, and perhaps this is actually the wearing of a ring that's caused this. But these look like crease lines, and one of the vague and sort of arbitrary arguments for the lines on palms is that they're flexor lines, that they're caused by the physical activity, that the reasons for these lines are external. But actually, when we look at the hands of people who use their hands for their work, the majority of them have far fewer lines, and those who use their minds have far more lines. Those who are greater with their heads than their hands have far more intricate lines. And also that theory, which I feel is quite baseless, doesn't explain the complex palmar marking, the isolated and quite sort of extreme and profound palmar markings that appear out of nowhere, that are very deep. They come and go within sometimes days. You know, it just doesn't explain that. So this band right here, it does seem to provide this, although it does tuck itself in, it sort of, you know, almost wastes the thumb a little bit. Although it provides this appearance as though some sort of external force has created this, looking at the lines and the way they kind of jut out of this, I feel like there's more to this than meets the eye. So I do think that this is actually a physiological rather than external forces, rather than physical forces creating these lines. What would that mean? That would mean that there is, or has been, this is the left hand, and remember this is internal, and there's probably or perhaps a feeling of obstruction and oppression against their ability to action their ideas. There's a lot of thoughts and feelings around what it is they want to do with themselves, and there's a restriction here. On the right, we just don't see that same thing, that can only be a good thing, really. That can only mean that the right hand being the material, the physical, the practical, this is not as big an issue in practically speaking, materialistically. In their career, they're not as obstructed. Perhaps home life is difficult for them to communicate. And maybe that's why there's this need for freedom of isolation to express themselves alone. Perhaps this is why they value their alone time so much. The thumbs themselves as well, they kind of taper off into these neat little points here. And this shows someone who has refined tastes, as well as someone who likely, how can I put this, they probably get tired quite quickly and they need to have a couple of cat naps through the day. Now, I've been looking at the fingerprint patterns, and the right hand is clearer. So we can see 3 whorls here. I believe we have another whorl just here, and another, whorls on the index finger. This is a very individualistic person. They're going to almost go against the grain. They'll watch how everyone does things and question why they are not. Although they're a team player, they are certainly not a sheep. This is someone who questions why we do things in the way we do. I'm just checking the overall shape here. This is someone who is quite sort of intense, potentially quite stubborn, headstrong. They'll do things their way. I don't want to say their way or the highway, because that's not necessarily true, but they will definitely, they do things in a very unique way. This is a very unique person. The whorl on Apollo, this is always seen with creative people, and as I say, they've got a very creative headline here. There's definitely something happened here that changed their outlook. There's a bit of a turn here. Jupiter is fairly high set as well. Jupiter is on the long side, which is nice to see. This is, I think, quite the leader in some respects. However, that kind of rare, leadership qualities anyway, and if they are in some sort of leadership role, they are certainly rare in that they are, well, as I've already said, unique, but they listen to others, they consider others' thoughts and feelings. They certainly will take on board what's being said, and they're definitely quite a deep thinker as well. The fingers are, as I say, they are long. The thumb reaches past, or just about reaches up to the third phalanx, halfway mark of the third phalanx of Jupiter. A deep thinker. This person certainly pays close attention to detail. Notice the ever so slight kind of wasting here of Apollo. This is of the second phalanx of Apollo. This is always seen with people who are a little bit nitpicky. And I don't want to put too much emphasis on that, because I don't think that's not the overall takeaway of this person's character. But I do think that this person has to be highly observant in their role. There's quite a low set heart line here as it swoops in up in between Jupiter and Saturn, and this is actually a really nice curve. It's nice and low down and it sweeps right upwards, and it shows this very strong maternal instinct. So if they are a leader, this is someone who takes people under their wing and you'd feel quite safe and secure and comfortable around this person if you were working with them, if you were quite new to working with them in this team. And as I say, they're, this team player, they're very conscious of other people and their feelings and their abilities. So I feel like this is quite a warm person. I mean, I have already stated at the beginning of this video, there is a bit of a deficiency around Venus, just a little bit, not so much on the left hand, and I think this might well be more sort of health related. It's not around their charisma or their warmth or their creative abilities either, because Venus encompasses a lot of these qualities. So it's about kind of narrowing down, deduction, find out which of these qualities are we getting at here. Now, the common denominator here, the last final thing I'm thinking is actually it's down to health, and maybe it's got something to do with this here. We'll get to the bottom of that a bit more, but just overall, that Neptune is strong, and this goes again with this strong communicative abilities. This is someone who is certainly, this is the hand of a communicator. Venus is what it is we want to do, our desire, as well as all of the traits I've mentioned, charisma, constitution, sure, but warmth, love, appreciation for all things beautiful in the arts and creativity. It's love and familiar, family, friendships, the home. So it's all of these things. But in terms of it's also desire, and in terms of why Neptune is so important, is because when it's raised enough, when it's developed enough, it allows desire to travel across. It creates this little bridge so that we can get our desires across to the outside world. Luna is this unconscious place of travel and escapism, intuition, imagination and dreams. In order to reach the outside world, we need to be able to bridge this gap with the help of Neptune, and this person is able to do that with a well-developed mount of Neptune. We can see a little bit of a loop of seriousness here. I do think that they also have a good sense of humour about them as well. So there's this balance. I think this person, as I said, they're quite complex characters. They know when to be serious, to take things seriously. I'm sure they certainly take their role seriously, but they also have a good sense of humour. There's a warmth, a sense of charisma about this person. So this is certainly someone who requires inspiration. If they get bored, they're going to pick up and move on. The headline, as I say, it's quite long and sloping, and it reaches into quite into some of the deeper depths of Luna. Money is not as important to this person than most people. This is the sort of person who their creative freedoms, their ability to express themselves, a sense of peace and happiness, health is far more important. Being around friends and family, downtime, all of these things are far more important than material stability, financial gain. And if it weren't for the overall sort of squarish feature of the palm itself, this person might be sort of lost to the most intuitive and unconscious side of themselves. So they're really grounded in that, and that is in itself is a strong and positive feature, because they have such a rich imagination, and they probably find themselves lost in these thoughts quite a lot. But there is also the sense of hard-working, pragmatic approach to the way that they respond to the world around them and stimuli. There's this kind of no-nonsense feeling from these fingers, the thickness of them, but there's also that length about them as well that makes this person analyze and process quite slowly at the same time. The thumb in itself it's not incredibly long, but it's high set enough. As I say, this is a difficult reading just because this person is such an oddball. On the left hand here, looking at the chirology now, we can see there's a driving force here to make a change that affects the life, their thoughts, their overall journey in life, and the way they feel. It affects every area of their life, and it's brought out into the open as it reaches up into this quadrant of the palm that represents how we are revealed to the outside world, how we reveal ourselves to the outside world. And this is, quite a common feature in people's palms, and it shows potential breakup, potential divorce. And where palmistry becomes a bit difficult in these terms is, where do you read when this event happens for this person? For me, what I've learned is to go by the fate line. I might be wrong about this, but we can see both fate lines deeply affected by this change. And this is, it looks to be about the age of 42, but what's interesting to me is the way the line stops before it reaches the heart line, or at least it stops here, and then kind of there's an interference here with this person's, it changes course almost before, as it reaches the heart line. So this would suggest that it's affected their health differently from the rest of, I feel like this isn't actually divorce at all, that this was some sort of event that affected their health. It's health related. It affected all areas of their life, but it's more health related than emotional, because it doesn't reach up onto Mercury, doesn't quite get there. So it's as profound, it's as impactful as divorce, but it's not quite as emotionally damaging as that. It still looks to strike at this person's Apollo line, the sunshine in their life, their happiness, their talents, what they're able to do and how they're able to do it and what makes them happy. But remember, this is the left hand, so it's internal. That's why I was leaning more towards something like divorce as the reasons for this change in the first place. But the right hand, it doesn't look as impactful, and that could be because it doesn't affect them as much now. So just going back a bit here, notice on the lifeline there's an island here. This is from the age of 14 right up to 18, 19, something like that. Maybe 12, right up to 19. And you can see, here's the heart line, and there's some branching off here. And this is where the heart line reaches down and into the lifeline, and it's showing disappointment. It's showing that the heart line crashing down into the lifeline shows a period in this person's life where there was a tragic, not necessarily an accident, but something happened to them that affected them deeply. And from this, it looks to affect their happiness. It's quite a complex one. I can see on the family ring there is one child, but I can't see any union lines or attachment lines, relationship lines, marriage lines, as they're probably most commonly referred to. So I'm wondering if, putting all of this together, there was some awful circumstance where something more positive came out of it. And then at the age of, and I'm going to say, this is potentially, if we're looking at it as health related, so we see it here as well, it looks to strike the fate line there. There's a sort of 10-year period here where there's support needed from family, there's motivation required. I don't know if this is the real tricky thing about timing events in palmistry, and it's one of the most difficult things for any hand analysis. But we can see that these support lines here inside of the lifeline, these repair lines, if you like, assistance, Mars lines, sometimes referred to as guardian angel lines, they create this, the convergence of these lines creates a few squares here, and squares are always protective, and inside of the lifeline, attached to the lifeline themselves, they often represent hospitalization. So this 10-year period, from the age of 25 or so up to 35, this person was likely in and out of hospital, and at 35 it stopped this person's ability to make money in their primary career path. However, At the age of 24 or so, they began a secondary career, and this secondary career has flourished, and it's not been obstructed by this health issue. And we see the same thing on the right hand as well. This secondary career is much stronger. So it's almost as though this door closing, this health barrier, has in some ways enabled this potential kind of hobby that was making money. They've now been able to put more time into it in some way, to put more effort into it. So 53 and onwards actually looks very strong. There appears to be a secondary income here. Career looks very strong from before this time, in fact. But from 53 onwards, things look much stronger. The success line is interesting because it's directly linked to their ability to communicate and to their child. I believe they have a son, and I believe that their son is everything to them. They might have more than one child, but I know they have at least one, and I think it's a son. So the fate line in palmistry, it's often, it will show us our path in life, but also, as a lot of lines in the palms, it doubles as a representation of a part of the body, and the fate line represents the spine. And so when we see it kind of offset like this as it reaches the headline, often it's symbolic of there being some sort of spinal injury, potential spinal operation, and that could be what's occurred here at 35. You can see this potential hospitalization, this stopping of this primary career. There's quite a lot here that shows the potential for a drastic kind of spinal operation, and that might tie in with what we're seeing here. This being the parathyroid. The parathyroid regulates the calcium secretion, and that can have an effect on the kidneys and bones. So I wonder if this is linked in some way. And notice that on the left hand, the mercury line is deeper than on the right. The right, it's longer perhaps, but it's faint. It's not as strong. And way back when, medieval palmistry, they would say that they would literally refer to this as the liver line. And you can see the health of the liver. The spleen itself is represented down here. And so this kind of slight sort of gouging here seen could be to do with kidney health. So I'm wondering if this parathyroid is to do with this. Maybe I'm just going down a bit of a rabbit hole. So in about 3 more years' time, 56 for this person, they might well need to have another operation of some sort. After this time, things really look up. This is certainly a highly intuitive individual. You can see this sympathy line, or intuition line as it's sometimes referred to, reaching right across Jupiter, touching the heart line. This person has an ability to read people on just about every level, right from the gut. They can kind of almost pick up on their feelings. So the good news is, although there might be a need for an operation, at the age of 56, as I say, there is this Mars line that runs for a long time afterwards, and that is assistance, it's help, it's aid, and it's there for this person. So you can see on the left hand here, there's a need to protect from 35 right up to 56. But after this age, things look much more positive, and that's literally only a few years around the corner for this person. So a bit of an odd one, because I kind of backpedaled on the divorce theory, but I think I got there in the end. Let me know what your thoughts are on this one. Thanks for watching, and please subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.